Well, I grew up Unitarian Universalist, so because I called it Unitarian when I was a child, because I went to First Church, downtown.
Oh.
And my parents, took me there. They lived in Brewery Town, 26th Street, and I really wish my mother, was still alive to be able to interview her, because my parents came to this church in 1963, as we moved from the Brewery Town location to Mount Airy in 1963 when I was 18, and I had already finished 1 year at Temple. And as I say, I grew up Unitarian, and I loved something in Sunday school. I loved all the discussion about other religions. Mm-hmm. And so ultimately in New York, I met, my then future husband, and he's a Presbyterian minister. Well, now a retired Presbyterian minister. And you see my great view that, you could deal with all religions working together. I thought, well, that wasn't any problem. And, it was really fun. But I wanted to have the family be together a lot, so we mostly as a family went to Summit Presbyterian Church when I moved here later after my marriage, because that was a lot later. We moved here we moved back to Philadelphia in 1986. At that time I was married and had, 2 young children, Rebecca and Elizabeth. So going back to, so I'm jumping around here, but going back to 1963, I was not, I don't think I would call myself a regular attender at church. I came sometime with my parents. My parents were very regular about coming to church. And then I moved, in 1970, I moved to Baltimore, and then I was away from Philadelphia from 1970 to 1986. So, as you see, I've been in and out of the church over those years. And I wanted to really tell a story that my mother had told, which I know some people already heard, and is on the Girls High video. She was on the 150th anniversary video. Mm-hmm. And my mother went to Girls High. She graduated in 1930. So the class trip for seniors at that time was to Washington, D.C., and they stayed overnight. I forget if it was one night or 2 nights. But she was so shocked when they were at the hotel that there were 4 girls who weren't there. She found out that the African-American girls had to sleep in a different hotel. And she felt like that, and it was just a total shock to her. She wasn't aware of treating people differently by race. And it may not have been the total beginning of her social awareness, but she described it as very significant to have this experience. And so my parents were extremely socially aware, and they were supporters of unionization, and some of that was their own development over time, that my father would sometimes give rides to the cafeteria workers at Penn in the early 1930s and found out the conditions they had, and they were terrible, and they wanted to unionize. And so they progressed from that to being active in the peace movement. And so I just grew up with this idea of social activism. So I admire the people who came from a totally different background and suddenly became socially active, because I sort of just inherited it. So in 1963, I knew that Mount Airy was an integrated neighborhood. It was already well known that this was a neighborhood where, blacks and whites were living together. In the house, we got a house on Sedgwick Street, and I loved it being near the woods, and my brother would go off, birding and met birders. And I know he attended Sunday school here. He was 7 years younger than me, so he was maybe 11 when we moved to Mount Airy, and my sister was 20 and I was 18. So I feel like my more major involvement is with my own children, with USG, because Rebecca, attended USG a lot. She would come to USG with my parents, who I think came every Sunday. Al and Florida Lisi came every Sunday to USG. And Rebecca got involved with the Sunday school. Elizabeth seemed happier staying at Summit, but I was always free to let the children choose. And youth group when Rebecca was here. This would be in the second half of the 1990s. It was very, I mean, the Sunday school was wonderful, and Hal Krieger and Brene Graham were the mentors or sponsors. And there were great trips called cons, the YRUU had, and cons were meetings of youth groups from all over, and they would have very complex schedules of activities of creative writing, of spiritual development, and the youth would be involved in leadership, and Rebecca got very involved in leadership through that. And I know she later became a youth representative to the JPD board, so the church was extremely important to Rebecca. So both the Sunday, not just the cons, but there was every Sunday meeting with the youth. They were very good friends. So that was the big involvement with church, was through her. And I, and as a lot of people know, Rebecca went on to become a Unitarian Universalist minister, which is now in Quincy as the senior minister.
And you mentioned when we spoke briefly last night that your family had been affected by McCarthyism.
Yes, as I said, my parents were greatly involved in union organizing and politically active, and I actually never know to this day whether they actually were members of the Communist Party or not. My father would not like to talk about it, but he was called up by the House Un-American Activities Committee, I believe it was 1952, and he was at that time pharmacology professor at Jefferson, and he was fired. He never actually appeared before the House Un-American Activities Committee, but just being on the list to get called, Jefferson fired him. So we had very, very little money. Like, say, in the 1950s, 1952, for several years, we really had very little money. And we were living in the house where my mother was born. Literally, it was the house where my mother was born, that her grandfather had bought. And we're there till 1963, as I mentioned. And my father got first jobs with a camp, like the liberal community in Philadelphia really supported people who were having problems. So he was hired by a man who ran a camp, and he was a year-round staff person for a few years and worked 4 summers at the camp, and we got to go to the Poconos, and so we were helped out by people in the community. And actually, my first paid job was working at Sunday school at the First Unitarian Church downtown. And I remember it so well because I actually got paid and I bought myself a winter jacket with a pattern I really, really liked. I don't really remember. I mean, I just remember we were involved in the church way before that. And so I remember my grandmother died, I think, the previous year, and I definitely remember interactions at the church around the funeral, and interesting from a child's point of view. Like one day, I think we had Sunday school in the minister's study, and after Sunday school, the minister said something to me about my grandmother dying, and it was just so sweet to take that talk with a 6-year-old. But no, I don't remember anything about the greater involvement at First Church, really.
Or about, do you remember whether the church was supportive of your family in the way that the wider liberal community was?
I really don't know. I know we really had so little money. I got invited to parties for people with no money, Christmas parties and stuff like that. So it went on for a few years. And then my father got back into, research with biology through through friends, but somebody who worked in research lab in biochemistry and needed his help in the lab, and he got back into the research world, not teaching world. And he really was able to work, the rest of his career doing something academic. Sometimes it was editing journals or so. As I say, but we had moved here by 1963 when he was still working, so then all the support changed to here. But we were in better shape by then. They were looking at this neighborhood, and it was a big 3-story house that they bought in 1963, cost $10,000. Which you kind of laugh at now, right?
And then did you continue to live in this community the rest of your life? Or no, you said you went.
No, I was in Temple then, and then I went to Hahnemann. I graduated Hahnemann in 1970, and then I did my residency in Baltimore. And then, after residency, I went to 1 year, got a master's in public health at Hopkins, and then a couple years later moved to New York. And then in New York, I met my future husband, Froome, and then we moved, we as our family moved back to Philadelphia in 1986. Yeah, so there was this hiatus from 1970 to 1986 when I was not living in Philadelphia. But of course, never lost contact with USG because my parents were very active and would come to church sometimes if we were visiting. And my sister, my family got a lot of support from USG because my sister had significant mental illness. And so on a personal level, USG has been tremendously supportive of lots of things. My own political activity, I think, I don't feel related to the church, but always feel supported by the church. Because I've been active in Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, going way back into high school. This was before I moved to Mount Airy. It was the time of the, after the bus boycott, there was also the lunch counter boycotts about integrating the lunch counters at Woolworths. And I know current people don't even know who Woolworths is, but it was called the Five and Dime store, and a national chain, but they had lunch counters, which I guess none of these stores do now. But and there was a national boycott to support the boycott in the South because the counters were not integrated. So during high school, this would be, I graduated high school in 1962, so in the 1960s range. I don't remember the exact years of the lunch boycott, but I and some other people from high school joined the picketing at Woolworths every Saturday morning downtown in Philadelphia, down on, I think it was probably Chestnut Street where Woolworths was.
Just 12th and Chestnut. I remember it.
And also, it's also before I moved here, but I was very active in Fellowship House. I know some people still know Fellowship Farm, but there was Fellowship House that existed for many, many years, and that was on Girard Avenue near 15th, and we lived at 26th and Girard. And so as a high schooler, I was very active in Fellowship House.
And what did Fellowship House do?
Fellowship House was trying to promote people living together by understanding each other's cultures. I'm not sure what adult activities went on, but the teenagers, just had group meetings, and we would celebrate different holidays. Like somebody would sing Purim, and we'd have the pastry, and they had speakers who were important. And Martin Luther King came there too when he came to Philadelphia. So I was in the same room with Martin Luther King.
And what was that like? What are your memories of
that? I remember that being phenomenal. I don't remember when I became really aware of Martin Luther King, because all through high school, from 58 to 62, I remember being politically active. And that's when he had air raid drills too. And me and a couple other kids refused to sit down when they had these air raid drills in the halls. And
did you get in trouble? Or?
No, actually, they just ignored us. They didn't, that was like, if they had paid attention to us, they would have made a big deal of it. So I think they decided the easiest thing was just to ignore it, and then it was not a real big deal. There were some other kids at the school, what they called the Red Diaper Babies. So we did things together, about being politically active in high school. And then I was at the March on Washington, the great March on Washington with Martin Luther King. And what I remember tremendously about that was buses going into Washington. Buses still went down New York Avenue because it was before all the super expressways that bypassed everything in the city. And I remember these buses going down and through New York Avenue, and the residents sitting on their houses and their stoops or just standing outside, and everybody was cheering. I mean, it was like we were a liberating army of some kind. It was this phenomenal excitement about these buses going down to Washington. I don't remember that much about the day. I remember Martin Luther King's speech. I remember it was really hot, and I retreated to one of the few trees. That's the one thing I remember. But I definitely heard his speech, but I don't remember all the length of all the speeches. It was just the excitement, the spirit, the excitement of that is phenomenal.
And did you go with a youth group?
And I don't remember who I went with.
Oh.
I know Barbara Dowdle and I have talked about that, and we talked about her mother being at the march, and she was at the march, and I can't remember who I went with. I know Barbara said she walked off with a friend, and she actually missed the main part of the speech about the Hybrid Dream speech. So I have no recollection of who I went with. It could have been Fellowship House. I'm not sure.
And how did you become aware of racism or white privilege or just race relations? What was sort of the dawning of your awareness of that dimension of social justice?
Yes, I have rarely, if ever, lived in an all-white neighborhood, so there's this. I obviously knew about Rosa Parks. I was pretty young then. And I don't know if that was because my parents talked about it, but I knew all the integration, all the fight for civil rights. But knowing about what was going on in the South was all hearing about it. And in Philadelphia, I wasn't terribly aware of tensions in Philadelphia. So I think I just grew into it, just hearing about it as I was growing up, and it was obviously the right thing to do to support civil rights. The idea of discussing white privilege, I gotta say, I feel like USG has more influenced me on the discussion about white privilege. I think it's great having a pamphlet about white privilege and discussing that. Since I think it's a really different experience if you grew up never being with African American people or Asian people or Spanish people, but I always grew up with all kinds of people. And I think the only time I lived in a really all-white neighborhood was probably a year or two in Baltimore when I was somewhere around residency. But thinking about white privilege, there are times bringing up the whole issue of there was several years ago I was taking a walk in Chestnut Hill by myself, and I was thinking, gee, if I was a black teenager, probably the cops driving by would say, "What are you doing here?" And it's just little daily things like that just made me. That idea of white privilege makes me think of that. And sometimes I think about we have to have enough more discussions of back and forth about there also is black antagonism toward whites, because I do remember my kids standing waiting for a bus and having African American teenagers throw little stones at them, so that I don't hear too much discussion of what anger gets shown to white kids. And so I think we need discussion both ways. But that power issue, the white privilege and the power issue of whites is so critical for people to understand. And one of the recent things I really love about USG's involvement, and actually Summit Presbyterian Church is also very interested in this, is the whole issue of mass incarceration. I think that's such an important issue now. So, if you want to talk about other USG experiences, which are totally personal things, it's been huge. Support for my family once they were in Mount Airy just has been so huge. Because my sister was a big problem. My sister Carol, she had was a brilliant person, beautiful, all sorts of talent, art, but great artist, beautiful vocal voice. But she was really prone to depression. I mean, from very early on, she had, mental health issues as a young child, and then she became an alcoholic. And over the time, the different ministers have helped meet with my family to try to help deal with her problems. And then when she was terminally ill, there was a lot of support from the family. And Nina Gray was minister then, and she was very supportive with Rebecca. She was the one who told Rebecca that Carol had actually died. And we all met at their house. I just remember that, her coming over and everybody meeting together and talking. And my husband has severe hearing loss, and he has to use hearing equipment. And I remember it was Nina who said, well, your hearing equipment can be like a talking stick, that in some cultures, and in group meetings, they actually have a stick that gets passed around from person to person. And your microphone to have to be passed around from person to person is like a talking stick. And that it's really good for people. And that's been helpful to my husband and to all of us, really. And Rebecca had some of her own struggles in teenage years, and just youth group and the ministers, and Hal and Brene, and just super people. There were other adults too who were involved in the youth group, very supportive. And the other parents, I mean, there was just a whole group of teenagers and parents were very supportive. And then, so I remember so many things that happened here. My sister's memorial service, and each of my parents' memorial services, just very. And my father's memorial service was actually at Unitarian Universalist house, but with USG's involvement. And then real happy things too. My daughter Elizabeth got married here, and of course Rebecca's preached here and had support from USG for her ordination, which was in Boston. So only 3 people from USG were there, and besides us, we were there. So it's very, very supportive on a personal level.
And Louise, how do you think you've evolved as a result of your connection with this community and the support you've received, or just your involvement here and things that you've done?
I'm not sure exactly what you're getting at. So how have I evolved?
Yeah. As a person.
Yeah. Well, I mean, all the support, support from my daughter, for Rebecca, is very, very important. She's been beautiful to see her blossom, and I was really excited when she wanted to be a UU minister. I mean, I love it. I'm so happy that she is. And being able to share, obviously with the Doddles, that their daughter's Unitarian Universalist minister, and she grew up here too. It's just a real feeling of connection. And myself, I started coming here more regularly after Rebecca graduated from high school. So I would support my husband a lot by going to Summit Presbyterian Church a lot of the time. And I said, no, I've got to spend more time at USG. And that's felt good, but I haven't really been involved in committees very much. But I did do one of the adult spiritual development things, which was building your own theology, which Susan Bacchius ran the group I was in, and that seems like that was a lot of years ago, but I didn't look up the date. And that was a very good group experience. So I think that's the first time, like on my own, not involved with my kids and my parents, but just me being involved. And that was a wonderful experience. I really loved it. Did a lot of thinking, a lot of writing. And that really made me feel more involved. So I've just peripherally done things. I do things when I can, because a steady schedule is extremely difficult with my home care responsibilities with my husband. It's really probably impossible to commit to something to say every week that would go on. But so I just help when I can. I've helped sometimes with the nin pin, and when I can't really be a regular usher but whenever, if Peggy is helping Lynn and she needs help, I just help out. So I just help out when I can. And I did join small group ministry, 2 years ago, and that took me a while to sort of figure out what that was about. But now I really, really like it. And so that's time for myself to read those topics every month and be involved with the group.
Mm-hmm. And can I ask about your theology or your beliefs and how those might have evolved?
Mm-hmm.
If you're comfortable talking about that.
Yeah. That's a little hard. I generally feel really good about all the principles of, life forces and supporting, the interdependent web of life. So I really like these 7 principles very much. Mm-hmm. I also really, really respect Christian teaching, and one thing I've had a problem with over the years is people who are just really violently anti-Christian and sort of like say you should never discuss Jesus or God. Well, I'm glad the church uses God, because God can be interpreted any way you want, just a life force. Mm-hmm. So I really respect the teachings of Jesus. I've never regarded Jesus as a God, and can't understand the Trinity at all. But I really respect the teaching of Jesus. I like that being incorporated into life. Because in my personal life, his teachings are very important. I like it along. The 7 principles are all great. And I enjoy that there are principles now. Because I don't think that was... when I was a child, I think it was very, very different. There weren't that much stated about what beliefs were. I think there's been a lot of evolution since like 1950 to now. Mm-hmm. It was really in the 1960s before I realized that it was a merger of universalism and Unitarianism. I just kept calling it Unitarian. Mm-hmm. And something I've been doing some reading about Universalism, which is interesting to see the different roots where mm-hmm. the religions came from. And Unitarianism was very traditionally Christian. It's definitely Christian in its origin, which seems some people don't know. So Unitarianism has evolved enormously from its early roots to now. Mm-hmm. I like the 7 principles now. They've got there.
Mm-hmm. So those weren't discussed when you were a child growing up in church?
I don't remember those at all.
And have the services changed a lot as well? The sort of the style of the service or the content?
Yeah, that's right. Going back to like 1963 to now, that's a lot of years. Mm-hmm. Yeah, but the services have changed. I think the style is... I feel like the current style is different. As I remember, which may not be very good remembering, but it was pretty traditional, service. You couldn't tell the difference between it and a Presbyterian service in terms of the actual order of service. Uh-huh. But of course, the content was radically different because you had different hymns and different readings, and so that the prayer bowl and a lot of things going on now are different. Mm-hmm. I liked having spoken concerns, and that's something I really miss. It seems to me there should be some more spoken concerns about concerns of the congregation. Mm-hmm. That I know it used to take a long time. People would give long speeches and go on forever doing, spoken joys and concerns.
So members...
They used to talk. People used to get up and say joys and concerns.
Okay. Not just the minister sort of speaking to that briefly, but
right.
People would say...
Yeah, the minister talks about 1 or 2 things. You don't get many things into the service. So. And I think at one point it went to once a month to have it spoken, and then it went to never having spoken concerns. And I liked candles. I think it's really a shame that, all the safety rules, we have to have rocks instead of candles.
What did the congregation used to do with candles?
Candles, yeah. You came up and lit a candle. Instead of putting a rock in water, you lit a candle. Mm-hmm. So there were lots of candles. Uh-huh. And there were enough to go around. You could light candles.
Mm-hmm. And Louise, looking forward, how would you like to see USG evolve or grow? Do you have sort of wishes or a vision for the congregation's future as a community?
Yeah, well, one thing I could say, it's certainly nice to have a big enough congregation that there are enough active people to do, involvement in the community. Because it takes a lot of people to do things like, even things like a dinner at Lingelbach. I mean, everything takes a lot of people, and supporting NIMPIN and to be able to go out, get people to go to Harrisburg for you plan. You need a lot of people. So I just hope we do keep getting a lot of people. And I love we are multi-generational. I mean, it's really great to see so many children, young families with children. I think that, I just think that RE for children is so wonderful. I mean, it was so important to me growing up. I just feel like, Unitarian Sunday School was like a saving grace and a chaotic fuel about life and society. And I think it's phenomenal that the kids should have that time together. And I think that the kids have to be able to welcome other kids. I remember one time a few years ago, there was a family that came here, and some months later I saw the mom, I think at UU House, because she had a mother at UU House. But this woman's daughter, they had not kept coming here because the daughter did not feel welcome in Sunday school. She felt like she was never accepted. So like if you have, I don't know if I don't have enough contact with the children now to know how they relate to new people. But that's obviously an issue that not only the adults have to be welcoming, but kids have to be able to welcome other children and not be in cliques. And so I just, RE growing is really important. So, and I'd like to, there's so many projects we're involved in already, with the mass incarceration and the schools. These are great projects. And I'm also personally very concerned about immigration. So that's a topic that I don't know how much people are involved in here, and I don't have time to spearhead it right now. But my daughter Rebecca's experience living in Arizona, she was, hands-on involved in things like No More Deaths. We'd go into the desert and try to find people that need water. And it's, they're very real people when you find people who you meet and know, walking across the desert and dying of dehydration. And it's, there have been some good meetings at GA on immigration. That's, I guess, an additional thing I'd like to see here.
And UU Plan has an immigration justice team here in Pennsylvania.
I just wonder how much people are aware of immigration issues here. But also you just can't do everything, so it's, if I was going to choose the super major local projects really are the schools and mass incarceration. Schools are critical. People will leave the city. A lot of young families, and they start out here and then they leave the city because the schools are so difficult. So we need support of public schools, which I know is very active here. I haven't gotten into meetings, but I get lots of emails. I don't have time to read, but I'm so glad there's so much activity going on. And maybe over time I'll be able to do more. But I spend time taking care of family very heavily now. Both my husband and my older daughter and our grandchildren. That right now they need a lot of help. So I'm a hands-on family person.
You're helping. And Louise, is there anything else that you would like to add or to share?
I just know that the caring committee, it's wonderful. We have a caring committee with very active people and very sensitive about needing help. And if there's one big activity I did not mention is I've been in this women's group that's been going on for, 27 years now, or 28 years. And so that grew out of USG. It's not an official USG group, but there was a big meeting, it had to be about 86, 87, about women's issues. There was a day conference here, and a lot of us said, we cannot let this discussion stop. We have to get together and keep going, and that's how this group of women that I'm in has kept
And what is the
going.
group? Do you have a name, or is it?
We just called ourselves Women's Group.
Oh, that's
I mean, everybody was a member of USG. One person has, is still in our group, but no longer comes to church. It was originally a group of 12, and, one, Joanne Schick moved to Boston, and one woman dropped out of the group, and, Shirley Drayden moved to Madison, and, she just recently died. She's part of the group, so I think we have 9 people still meeting here. Very supportive of each other. And we meet at each other's houses. It's not a church function, but it makes us very involved in churches. Obviously, we discuss church things. Sometimes we discuss sermons, and it's, a lot support each other's lives.
So it's kind of a women's mutual support group, or are there certain issues that you focus on?
Yeah, I think I would call it a women's mutual support group. We started out wanting to discuss issues about, women's ability to be in the workplace and, be respected, and all the sort of some of the economic issues of what women face, and so the issues of child rearing and career. But we sort of got on to just supporting each other, telling about each other's lives, and just you bring in your beliefs about what's helpful. And if somebody's had a bad experience, you can support them in that. If things are going really well, you can support them in that. So yeah, that's a really big thing. Amazing I didn't talk about that till the end, because I wasn't thinking of that as a church, That's my friends who are here at church.
You've been meeting together for a long, long time.
It's either 27 or 28 years.
Practically speaking, can you think of anything that the church might do to bring in new blood to the congregation? I mean, one of the things that any church is thinking about is when their older members die off, and how are they going to keep going? You've had some connection with people, with women in particular, who you've stayed connected to. Is there anything that USG can do that might encourage more inclusiveness in the congregation? I mean, we're in an integrated community. One of the threads that's come up every now and then is that we're not as connected to the community as we could be. We're a lot better than we used to be, but is there anything, practically speaking, you can think of that the church might do to improve that, be more inclusive?
So, personal outreach is always really good. Like, when we had a topic, I invited my neighbors when Eli was speaking, because they were white parents who adopted black children, and they really enjoyed it, and I'm trying to get back to them about coming back. So personal outreach is good, but I think the most, I really don't know on an institutional level about how to reach out to other people. I don't have an answer to that.
I know there's a major event coming up, this teach-in on employment for ex-cons or returning citizens or whatever, coming up in November. I mean, that sounds, to me, that's an event that goes beyond Unitarian. And if it's focused more than just on the congregation, but in the general community, brings people in.
Yes, I would agree. Being active in major community events would be very important. And that's like a political one, really helping people get back into the community. I mean, I would think the involvement that's going on now with mass incarceration, people who have been more hands-on in that are meeting a wide group of people. So to keep being active in that is very, very good. And I don't know how much we do. I don't know whether it does any good things like Mount Airy Day and stuff like that, whether it makes a difference to have tables, but I don't think we do.
Well, we did a table at least this year at Mount Airy Day. I know Daniel did it.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I'm fairly new in the church, so I don't know if we've done that every year.
But I don't know if that accomplishes very much, because I think the activities I would call real, like that helping people get back into jobs, meeting people there is really very important.
Well, if you're involved in activities in the community, and if you have a table at Mount Airy Day that promotes your involvement in those activities, it helps.
Yes, it does.
When you're in a mainstream event and you've got a table, at least people walking by see you, whereas if they only see the sign driving by,
yeah, and if there are events at Vernon Park, I think we should be involved in events in Vernon Park, because that's like the middle of Germantown, and that's really close to us. So, but I don't follow that much of how many activities are going on, but I know other people do. But that it's important to be out there publicizing yourself. I'm not that much hands-on about, demonstrations and things going on in the community to be able to say where it would be important to be. But it's a good question about how to keep growing.
I think you're right about Vernon Park and the whole Germantown community. USG has been more present in Mount Airy and Chestnut Hill and than it has even been in Roxborough, Manioc. We're not in that area. Maybe we never will be. But in Germantown, we're the Unitarian Society of Germantown, and the original church was at Germantown and Chelton Avenue.
Right.
I mean, Green Street and Chelton, and Chelton Avenue.
Right.
So it's, I think it's time for us to be, and I think Ken agrees that it's time to try to bring back some more consciousness of that zip code.
Yeah, about Germantown. Like one thing on the last Martin Luther King Day, I asked, let's see, who was it? Was involved in the cleanup. I said, "Are you going to clean up that street in back of Health Center 9?" And he said, "Well, I would love to," because he also works at Health Center 9. Because I worked for 28 years in Health Center 9, which is 131 East Chelton Avenue. So, like, I walk from here to the Health Center. I've walked so many times, and you go through so many streets that are dirty. I mean, I can tell you streets I would love to have cleaned up the next time you do a cleanup, which are right back there all around the Health Center. But, I mean, people concentrate on Germantown Avenue or Sheldon Avenue, but, the streets people live on are these little streets that I thought we could have cleaned up. This whole area would have been beautiful. And so I don't know how to get input into that. So, because I'm not usually involved in the planning. I sort of hear things after they're planned. But that could be a way to sort of find out who's involved in specific areas. I mean, like, like I know that, I've walked around that part of Germantown a lot, and get more people who are hands-on before we decide what projects to do, maybe. Yeah. So but Vernon Park, I would really push that. When there are festivals at Vernon Park, we should know about it if there's a way to have a table or be involved. Yeah. The voter registration's been good when we've done voter registration, because you can just...
And that was at Vernon Park, right?
Yeah, well, I think sometimes walking around the neighborhood, but that's a way to be really out on the streets, is voter registration. And that's a big issue. I mean, Philadelphians don't vote. Because there was a meeting. It was actually held at Summit Church a few years ago with some of the officials from the election commission, and maybe that was around the time there was a lot of discussion about voter ID law. But one of the commissioners discussed that our previous governor was elected by a margin that was smaller than the number of registered Democrats in Philadelphia who did not vote. And I always think that's a good thing to use as a concrete example that it does make a difference to go out and vote. And in Philadelphia, I think the poorer people in Philadelphia, a lot of people don't vote. I don't know how it goes in the, people of college education seem to me may push more to vote. But overall, throughout the whole city, so many people do not vote. So it's actually getting people motivated to be in the local political process where you actually might make a difference. I don't know how that would relate to the church and how we can get involved, but I know voter registration is one of them, but voter turnout would be another way to try to get in. And one of the, one of the men who spoke here from the mass incarceration, I wish I could remember his name. Everybody would know him because he gave a sermon here.
Is that John Dye-Harrell?
And maybe he gave a sermon here. He preached one Sunday. Well, I was talking to him after one meeting, and he said the political machine in Philadelphia the Democratic machine in Philadelphia does not want active participation. That they like to choose their candidates and just have them supported. And I really believe him that, because just look at how many people were involved to elect Obama in the first election, and then within a year there was really just about no activity of get out the vote, or there was no follow-up on all this huge network that had been established to get people out to vote for the presidential election, and it could have been continued to affect local elections, and it wasn't. So I think he has to be right. So I certainly don't know much about the Democratic committee people, but maybe there's a way through politics to get more involved with people. I don't know.
Well, thank you so much, Louise.
Yeah, you're very welcome.
We're all set.
Yep. Yes, enough. You are welcome. I know there are probably a million. It's hard to think of things to say.
I know, you did great. It was
Oh,
so interesting.
It's so interesting to hear the reflections of people who've been involved in this community for a long time.
Yeah.
I'm very new to it.
I didn't want to say something that could sound more negative, but it's, really very interesting about the people I brought, my neighbors I invited to your Eli sermon. She talked to me a bit. We live, our apartment walls are, but we never see each other. We're so busy. You hardly even bump into.
Met them because it was a family I met.
Yeah, there were Marla
Yes,
Coburn.
I know her from my work. We're both psychotherapists.
Oh, okay. And she told me she knew you. That's
Yes,
great.
yeah.
Well, but she asked me a question. She said, I heard there was, said, how was the church on treating transgender people? I said, well, I think they're fine. But she had heard a story about somebody who was, that's turned off, right? Yeah. She had heard a story about somebody who was extremely unhappy and was very unhappy with the minister. And, actually, the next week I asked Eli about it, and she said, yeah, there was this one problem, and she thinks it was totally a misunderstanding. And I haven't had time to get back to Marla to talk to her alone. I see where my granddaughter and she has her kids, but
Right.
To have adult time to talk, I haven't been able to catch her yet to tell her this sounded like one personal thing. So that was my reaction when she said it. I said, I know there are sometimes people who have personal problems with someone, and this happened in the past with, all kinds of things. I told her without a name about somebody else who was, I have no idea. This one woman had a big problem with something Ken said and was just enormously upset, and it had nothing to do with ongoing policy. It was a personal thing that happened, And so, Eli told me this other thing was, it was upsetting to Kent that this person got upset, but it was all like a misunderstanding. It's not a policy issue. So, I know I'm trying to get back to her about that, to find some time alone to talk to Marla, because she said she loved coming here, and it would be so great. We'd walk here, it's like fabulous.
I did tell her about, the social justice work that happens here in the ERC and all. So
It would be great involvement.
I was surprised to meet, and I can't remember who it was, but I was surprised to meet I think it was a grandmother of a granddaughter who was transitioning to a grandson, I think, which was totally a new thing to me. It's the first time I had experienced someone who was genetically connected with somebody who was going through that conflict. And so I mean, I'm surprised to hear that there was some. I'm wondering whether that's the same family.
No. I don't know who it was, but I mean, Eli clearly understood. Eli clearly knew who it was, and so it was a personal thing. But it's interesting in our Vernon house, there was a teenage girl who transitioned to being a boy, and the parents were, I think, phenomenal. With just supporting him and getting everybody used to saying the new name. And if you make a mistake and say her instead of him or daughter instead of son, I mean, they're very good about always saying son and always saying he. But to get a whole community like that, 48 families, to be doing it, I mean, it's wonderful. That's what the kids need.
But it does take time.
It's really hard.
I work at a women's college where we have some transgender students, like people who transition during the time that they're there. And just getting used to kind of recalibrating your brain to think of somebody as a different gender, or we have some students who sort of identify themselves as neither male nor female somewhere.
You say them, they, all this stuff. That's like so hard to do.
We get pounded in with he and she from such a young age that it really takes like a conscious retraining, and you're going to make mistakes. Like I've come to just accept that. And it doesn't mean you don't accept the person.
Because I keep wondering, what happened to all these people in the past? Did they just spend all their lives hiding? I mean, what happened in the past?
I think people suffer a lot.
And I think that society is so male, female oriented. I mean, I was just visiting a friend invited us to a pool. It's in Abington Township Park. And to get into the pool, you enter either through the women's locker room or the men's locker room. That's the only way to get to the pool. There's no other entrance.
And how many forms do we fill out that just have 2 boxes, male and female?
Yeah. It is hard. I mean, the suicide rate is still higher with, transgender people. So I guess maybe it was even higher in the past. You just sort of didn't know about it when more younger people died from all sorts of causes. Maybe it was more hidden that people were really unhappy, because I mean, now we don't expect people to die from pneumonia or all these things. Now you're going to live forever, so it's. I mean, your question about how to grow is such a good question.